Identity and difference.
Oh, brilliant. Lectures. Yeah.
Yeah.
Excellent. Did you look at that, at the question of standing technology?
Yeah, we've been
Yeah.
in and out of that.
Oh, so you looked at Bremen lectures, didn't you?
That's
positionality.
The PhD seminars.
Oh, okay. So you looked at the question of standing technology. So I mean, you looked at identity and difference. So this whole question of the leap outside of metaphysics and why it is such a big issue. And you spoke about the surface through a Heideggerian.
Groundless ground.
Sorry?
Groundless ground.
Groundless ground, yes, and surface, and now we kind of move from the surface to the skin. That's the idea. That's why, I guess, why we bring Lyotard into the fold, or the folding. That's brilliant. And so, what did you say about the surface? Or the groundless ground?
It was about endurance, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Perpetuality and infinity.
What makes the ground groundless? Or is that silly? To start from another direction. How were your essays? Because I think last time I saw you, and it's really great to be here again. I'm just so pleased to have the opportunity to speak with you again. Last time we went through all the diligently through all the questions. So how did it go? Yeah. And the essays came back with decent binary marks. I'm really sorry I don't know your names. So I will try to pick some of the names as we go along. But then maybe if you can say your name at first. That would really help. Okay, well let's maybe try to start gently. Okay, so my name is Daniel Rubinstein. I've been journey student for 10 years, just finished my PhD. With her, she was my supervisor. I wrote my PhD essentially on looking at photography through Deleuze and Lyotard and Heidegger. I think Heidegger really was... it's all right. Right. I don't think we even officially started yet.
Okay.
So, hello. Do you all have rooms and places to sit? I'm occupying 2 seats. Okay, so someone can come here. Yeah, so I was just saying that,
Great.
my own research is all about using Heidegger and Lyotard and Deleuze and few other characters to look at photography. And the reason, kind of, the way it unfolded for me is that I kind of felt that all of them in different ways engage with the question of representation. And I'm sure the question of representation came up a few times in your discussions. Well, it somehow seemed to me that photography will be an interesting kind of ground, or a groundless ground with which to examine representation, because that's where kind of technology itself represents something. And of course, this question of technology brings in the Heideggerian understanding of technology. So there was quite a lot of mileage playing these concepts on this terrain of photography. And I have to say that I did use the tensor section of Libidinal economy quite a lot, but I also looked into Discourse Figure, which is another book by Lyotard. So I brought here 2 books which I found really useful on my travels. One is Jeffrey Bennington's Writing the Event, which is his book on Lyotard. And Bennington is really fantastic. You can actually go on YouTube and find his lectures. Did you hear of the European Graduate School? It's a sort of posh European institution for august American students who come and pay loads of money to listen to various professors. Very good joke if you can get it. But it's so Jeffrey Bennington gave you, and what is good about them is that they have fantastic recording facilities, and it's all on YouTube. So you can listen to people like Agamben, Bennington, Lacour-Labarre, before he died, Jean-Luc Nancy. So it's very, very good. They all speak in English. They are very, very good lectures. So I would recommend listening to a few of Bennington's lectures. It kind of gives you a sense of kind of what can be at stake in unpicking Lyotard. So that's one book. The other is my faithful companion, is the Lyotard Reader, which I think is a terrific value. The thing with Lyotard is that he wrote a huge amount, and not all of it is even translated to English. But this is an absolutely fabulous selection. And I wanted to say that in this reader, two things really caught my eye, and I spend a lot of time thinking about them. One is this lessons in paganism. I think we will come back to paganism a little bit later and ask what's so great about paganism. And the other is the sublime and the avant-garde. This is absolutely key, I think, because it's also where Lyotard gets, like in 3 pages, at the heart of his philosophical concerns through painting, through the discussion of the works of Barnett Newman, which is an American abstract painter, very interesting. So that just by the way, here they have the tensor chapter is present here, but they very cleverly edited it so it's only like 6 pages or something, 5-6 pages. Which is to say, you never need to read all of these books. You just need to read a little bit of each one. Okay, so do you all have the economy on the phone? Excellent. And so, I mean, because we're going to look at various passages from the book, so because we're going to look at various passages, it will be handy if at least you could sort of rubberneck someone else's text.
Do you want me to put it on the screen?
Is it possible?
Yeah.
Oh, that would be fabulous. Yeah. I didn't know we have technology. Okay. But how many people actually invested in one of those things? Yeah.
Just the PDF.
There is a PDF. Yeah, it's on ARC. So, did you have a chance to look at the tensor? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And are there any kind of first thoughts about it?
We're talking about the ephemeral scheme as well.
The chapter before is the ephemeral scheme. Did you read it in class?
I think she wanted us to read both of them. When I read the skin.
You read the skin?
And tried to read the tensor. I found the tensor very good.
But the skin, not so bad.
No, I found it really.
The skin is good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Really close.
Anyone else read the ephemeral skin? And anyone read the tensor? Tension. Okay. That's good. That's fine. Before we even get to discuss the tensor, let's just look at the book itself for a second. So, Lyotard. What do we know about Lyotard? The D is silent, and so I'm not speaking French, but it somehow makes it feel more open. So, what do we know about Lyotard? What is he famous for? The postmodernism, yeah. The poor guy just accidentally invented postmodernism. Through which text? The postmodern condition, which is really interesting. You know, if you go into any kind of media studies department around the country, or if you talk to people who teach media, sociology, cultural studies, they all heard of Lyotard. They all quote from him, but only from this one text, the postmodern condition. And also very particular parts of it. I think it's quite interesting what kind of parts of this text became domesticated and what people found kind of not really palatable. I think the same fate exactly kind of fell to Foucault and to some extent to Walter Benjamin. In the English sociology and cultural studies department, they did like a surgical job, removing everything which is too libidinal, too obscure, too ephemeral, and just left various discourses about power, technology, the loss of aura, these kind of things. So in a sense, what we're trying to do is to fill these gaps. You know, because the postmodern condition term that there is a continuity between the postmodern condition term and the libidinal economies. Okay, so this is Lyotard, and roughly when did he write this book, or when he was active? What period we're talking about, generally speaking? Do you have a sense to what historical period he belongs? You are absolutely right. Yeah. The whole postmodern condition gesture came out of the 1968 student riots in France, mostly in Paris. So that's Lyotard, Deleuze and Guattari, and a whole bunch of other people who are generally labeled as the post-structuralists. And Bourdieu, to some extent, who is still writing, all came out as a response, or kind of, they all were formed at these events in the summer of 1968. So this is quite important. It's just interesting, and also there are very close, intimate, personal links, personal as in friendship, between Lyotard, Deleuze and Guattari, Foucault, Derrida. They all went to the same schools. I mean, they're in the same universities. They all were taught by the same people, by such people as Hippolyte, who taught both Lyotard and Foucault, and he's a great French Hegelian. Yes.
What about Marcuse?
Well, I think, I'm not entirely sure, but I think Marcuse is a little bit earlier. Isn't he more like Frankfurt School? He's more like, I think he is slightly earlier generation. I would put
involved in the 68.
But I think, I might be wrong here, but I think he was involved in it more as from the other generation, you know, from the generation of people for whom the Second World War was the formative experience. But you know, we can check. I guess it's quite easy. But it's just important also to realize. You remember how last time when we spoke about Adorno, and we kind of approached the same point, but from the other end. The story of Adorno kind of came to an end with 1968, when these girls showered him with flower petals, with rose petals, and gave him a heart attack. And that point is also the starting point for Lyotard. Now, You might disagree, but for me, Lyotard is almost like the kind of insane, intoxicated continuation of Adorno. It's like Adorno on LSD. That's how I understand Lyotard. And he even wrote an article or an essay about Adorno, Adorno the Devil, it's called. I think out of all these post-structuralists, Lyotard is probably the one with the closest, a more kind of tortured and articulated relations to the Frankfurt school. But with Lyotard, there is also quite deep engagement with Heidegger. So that's where we're going to try to situate this discussion. So, okay, so we now positioned the man in some context. What about the book itself? So I want to think for a second about the title, Libidinal Economy. Two words. Which one presents most difficulty? Economy. Any other? Economy? Yeah, that's right. You're absolutely right. And why?
I don't know, I can kind of link the libidinal thing to, for example, the will of power of Nietzsche. So it's something that, you know, it's already accepted in a way. They already talked about this libidinal thing ruling everything. So now it's applied to economy, and this is, I don't know.
It's kind of Marxist, hasn't it?
Yes. So it's a kind of provocation, isn't it? What before we move on to the economy, which I agree with you, I think economy is much more problematic in this context. What is the libidinal? Just so we all be on the same page.
Sexual driving.
Exactly. Yeah, the libido, the sexual drive, desire, scheme, you know, you can call it art, you can call it different ways. Okay, but so economy sounds, it is such a kind of simple, everyday term, you know, economics. But what is interesting is to try to unpick. It's one of these words that when you ask people whether they know what it means, everyone knows, but when you ask them what actually the word means, very few know. Anyone has any idea what the word economy means or where this word came from?
Something we created.
Sorry?
Something that man created.
Man.
It's an idea we have.
Okay, but I think you're not wrong. You are maybe even right, but I just want to be a bit more precise in terms of what is the, if you want, even the etymology of this word. Where it came from into the English language? Yeah.
To be numbers. Ecology of numbers.
Well, not quite. But interestingly, it's from Greek, and the Greek word is oikos. You know that, yeah?
It's house and how you put the order in the house.
Exactly. Thank you very much. Great. Oikos is house. Oikonomos, oikonomy, oikonomia, I think, something like that. Yeah? Economia. Economia is kind of housekeeping. Yeah? So keep that in mind. Because we're going to try and understand what is at stake in this word and what kind of it's one of these hubs, you know, that you can pull different strings from it. So, I mean, as you were already saying, there is a kind of intersection in the question of economy, of various power relations and organization and management. So you could almost say that housekeeping is a kind of technology. There is a technology to keeping the house going. It's a kind of craft. It's a sort of skill. But I mean, there is an article by Giorgio Agamben that's called "What is an Apparatus?" I have it here on as a PDF, and I have it on Dropbox. I was hoping to print it out, but I will just maybe email it to all of you once tomorrow. But in this article, what is an apparatus? Agamben tries to unpick the term, the apparatus, what is in French called dispositif. And he gets to the idea that what we call the apparatus, what the French call dispositif, is relating to the question of economy.
It's dead. It's not working. Probably the best technical term at this point. It's not.
Thank you very much for trying it. Let's fix it. Great. Okay. Well, that's the skin, you know. And, so, I mean, Agamben there, I don't know how much we can trust him, but in his investigation, he came to suggest that the word economos, coming from Greek, has also a kind of a theological notion. It plays part in defining the divine Trinity in the Catholic Church. Now, as you probably know, in Catholicism, God is of course one, but also three. Yeah, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And in the early centuries of the Church, in the second and third centuries AD, many people were objecting to this Trinity because they were saying, we don't want to bring paganism back into the fold. Yeah? Now, paganism is a very important word here. Lyotard is very keen on paganism. So these early fathers of the Church were saying, we don't want this Trinity because it's almost like having another kind of pagan pantheon. However, the argument was that in the same way that the father of the house, the mayordomos, can bestow some responsibilities on the son in terms of the upkeep of the garden or the field, without taking away the authority of the father. In the same way, God, which is one, which is omnipotent, can bestow some responsibilities for the conduct of the human race on Christ, without, in a sense, giving away anything. Yeah, that it's not undermining divine power. And in this way, this term economies came to signify the engagement, the material engagements of everyday life. Yeah, in a theological sense. However, that's again, that's where it comes from reading carefully Agamben's text. While this approach kind of rescued the unity of God, while at the same time allowing for the Trinity, it also created a problem because it kind of drove a wedge or created a divide between the notion of being or the ontology and the practice of the everyday running of life. Now, are you comfortable there? Don't you want to sit on some chairs or something?
No, I'm fine.
You okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Because there are more chairs here. All right. Well, if anyone is uncomfortable, then do speak up, please. Right. So in that way, you see, there is a kind of already a contradiction, or already the word economy indicates a rupture or a sort of break between being and praxis, between between the material operations required to sustain life, which is the economy, and the being. I mean, as you already read Heidegger, you know, there's no need to to explain. I mean, you're already familiar with the idea of being. Yeah. So it seems that there is something very peculiar to the Western tradition, is this split of praxis from being. You remember how in Heidegger, in Identity and Difference, in the first lecture, Identity, he speaks about the Parmenidean sentence, for the same thinking as well as being. Yeah? And you probably all discussed. And why is that such an issue for Heidegger? Because he points to a point, he tries to direct us to a point in the history of Western thought before this divide, before this rupture. So he basically says, and I'm talking about Heidegger, that this division between economy and being is not natural, is not kind of pre-given condition of existence, but it's artificially created at a certain historical moment. And he can even pinpoint it almost to the line in Plato or in Aristotle, where this division happens. And he says, but if you go to the pre-Socratics, before the Socratic method, you will realize that for philosophers such as Parmenides, there was no divide. Being and thinking was the same. What does it mean to say that being and thinking was the same? It means to say, it means to... Sorry? Whether it is like Kant, it's really another big discussion. So I think we'll not go there at the moment, because we will have too many things on the table. But what does it mean to say that thinking and being are the same? It means to say that thinking is just as much an action as it is a description. Yeah? It means that then, to say that thinking and being are the same is like to say that an object and a word are the same. Yeah? Now that might sound absurd, and for most people outside this room, it will sound absurd, you know. Obviously, stones can kill, but words don't, no? Something like that. But no, Parmenides says that is not the case. Words can just as much kill as stones can, because thought, thinking, and being are the same. And then, you know, Heidegger elaborates on that, and he says thinking and being, they belong together, and with the emphasis on the belonging, and you unpicked all that, I believe. Yeah? I just wanted to point out that the word economy holds some of this spirit in the title of the book. And it is somehow almost unbelievable, and maybe even sad, that these two lectures by Heidegger are really the most fundamental texts of 20th century thought. It is sad, you know, because Heidegger was a sad person, and But it is nevertheless such a key to understanding so many things that have been happening in thinking and in art and perhaps even in politics. That I also find myself going back to these two lectures over and over again. They always provide with some useful insights, especially as now I'm thinking quite a lot about the network in terms of the web, the computer networks, but also just networks in general. And then again, I find that this Heideggerian insistence on overcoming the separation between thinking and being somehow seems to apply very powerfully to trying to make sense of, let's say, of algorithmic computer networks. Anyway, so the economy then points to precisely this divide that Heidegger laments and complains about. You know, now according to Heidegger, what caused this split? Why in Parmenides thought and being are the same, but when we move on to Plato, Plato says where there are objects and images, and they are completely separate. There are ideas, eidos, and there are objects, and they really have nothing in common. They only have in common the question of reflection and representation. So why do you think, what happened? What do you think? I'm not sure Heidegger speaks about it in his lectures, but what do you think happened?
You mean how the language became representation?
How we forgot the lesson of Parmenides, that thought and being are the same. Maybe we didn't forget it. But according to Heidegger, we did. So why do you think that happened?
Maybe with the polis,
The polis? Yeah.
the democracy and the Romans and these kind of things.
Polis,
The
democracy.
state, the state.
What else did you say?
The state.
The state. But what you said something else? Polis, democracy. Sorry? It's to do with power and war. Maybe. What else? Yeah.
It's just that everyone was put down as the same, so that everyone was equal. So you couldn't step out.
Is it democracy you're talking about?
No, about everybody else. So, excuse me. So you couldn't exactly think outside as it is outside the box, or step out of the outside of it. Just because you go back to the identity. I think it's in this first lecture, I think it's, so that causes at the time why the suggestion that people forgot about it because they weren't able to step outside.
It's very good. Yeah. For Heidegger, you see, what happened, what drove us to forget about Parmenides, and Parmenides is only a shortcut for a whole philosophy, which we only have in fragments, for a whole way of life, for a whole relation, for a whole existence, or way of being that is forgotten. And for Heidegger, the reason, or maybe the point at which this forgetting begins, is the point, it's exactly the point at which rationality starts. Yeah? Now, so just I want to spend maybe, say, 2 words about rationality and why for Heidegger is such a problem. That also explains a lot to do with his political orientation. But I don't want this chat today to be about Heidegger. We're going to go to Lyotard, I promise, but I want to establish first what is at stake here. And I think that then the whole question of the tensor sort of starts to fall into place, I hope. So let's see if I can pull this one off. So around 5th century BC, yeah, 500 years before Christ, in Athens mostly, big war with the Persians that the Athenians won. You know, some huge sacrifices, but ultimately the small democratic state conquered, not conquered, but defeated the Eastern tyranny. It was a kind of victory of the small but intelligent, of the sophisticated and the wise over the totalitarian, the mighty. You know, the Persian armies were famously absolutely enormous in size. You know, there is a story that one of the generals asked every soldier to just put one stone, and they built a mountain, you know, like a real mountain. So there are all these stories, and roughly around that time, there is a kind of shift happening in Greek consciousness. You can see it very clearly in art. Suddenly, representation becomes kind of much more realistic. You know, suddenly the human body appears like a body. If you probably all know Gombrich's book, The Story of Art. Just go and have a look at this chapter when he speaks about Greek art, at this transition, because what happens at that point is that suddenly the human being or the human experience becomes really central to the way the world is experienced. So human intellect becomes the way by which kind of reality is being unlocked. Because in this moment the Greeks feel that it is through their perseverance and their art and their literature and their superior mind they defeated the mighty Eastern armies. At this moment also mathematics, geometry, perspective, musical scales, the Pythagoras, all of that suddenly kind of comes together and establishes a new order of being. In this new order, the human subject, the human being, becomes kind of the center of the world. And you can see it's interesting how, for instance, in the Parthenon in Athens, when archaeologists went there and measured the different columns, they realized that you probably know that, yeah, that they are not the same size, and they're also not straight. Everything is designed in the Parthenon to look harmonious from a certain human perspective. In the past, in Greek art, in Assyrian, in Mesopotamian art, everything was done as if for the eye of God, to grasp the human shape or the lake or the boat. And suddenly in Greek art of that period, what you see is this fascination with the way the world appears to the human being. So that for Heidegger, to cut a long story short, this is precisely the moment at which some ancient knowledge of belonging to the world, not being the master of the world, but being, as in some places Heidegger calls it, being the shepherd of being. This kind of mystical, intimate, libidinal, if you want, connection between the human Dasein, Heidegger called it, and being, just the fact of existence. This connection is severed, lost, and instead we have rationality. Yeah? Okay, so the story of rationality from that point onwards, for Heidegger, is just a sad story of farther and farther moving from remembering who we really are. Because really, for Heidegger, we are not the masters of the universe. We are the shepherds of being. That is our role. But the more we consider ourselves in control of existence, the more actually we lose our sense of self. And that is especially evident in the question concerning technology, especially in the article, the question concerning technology. But where have we strayed to? We are questioning concerning technology. And we have arrived now at aletheia. What is aletheia?
Truth.
Truth. We are questioning concerning technology, he says, but we arrived at truth. At revealing what has the essence of technology to do, what has the essence of technology to do with revealing? The answer, everything. So, technology, I want to suggest to you, is economy, is more or less the same thing. So you could also call this book, in your mind, libidinal economy. I mean, libidinal technology. Bearing in mind, what is technology for Heidegger? You could also call it the libidinal apparatus. Yeah, I mean, this is an apparatus, obviously. This classroom is an apparatus. The university is another apparatus, I think. Birmingham is probably another apparatus. The weather is also an apparatus. You know, there are various systems of different complexities. And
so,
yes.
What about the weather is an apparatus? Why is the weather an apparatus?
Why is the weather an apparatus? It's a good question. You know what? I will take it off the table. But don't we talk about weather systems?
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so it is a system. I mean, can there be a systemic weather? Does weather always have to be a system?
I think it's not necessarily a system. That's why if we don't analyze it, it's not a system. If we analyze it, it becomes a system.
I mean, you actually picked on something very, very interesting. And it's also quite, we were not going to talk about fractals today. But I don't know if you already mentioned fractals earlier. Johnny has a massive investment in the whole question of fractals. Some of the most interesting insights into the way chaos operates came from analyzing weather patterns. Lawrence, I think, was the scientist who started to, you know the kind of the butterfly effect?
Yeah.
Yeah? So I think that kind of maybe explains why weather is also a system. Another thing to consider in this context is that there is this article by Pierce of clouds and clocks, where he talks about kind of two different models that we all the time using. The model of the cloud, which is kind of ephemeral and unregulated, and the model of the clock, which is more mechanistic. And the weather is kind of, it can be both, it can be positioned between the two. But I just wanted to say that the apparatus shouldn't be only understood in terms of a device. You know, a photographic camera is an apparatus. The recorder is an apparatus. But they are also much more invisible, much more ephemeral apparatus. And it could be said, at least people like Agamben argue that there are entities, beings, and there are apparatuses. Now, what is interesting, and why I'm trying to kind of, why I keep driving at this question of economy, because technology, as we know from Heidegger, and as Lyotard will keep reminding us, technology is never innocent. technology is never a means to an end, and maybe we will be able to also say something about it better in this context. It's easy to think, you know, that things like that, like this, are just there for our delectation, you know, for us to use and exploit and, you know, make our lives easier. But if we take the notion of economy in its in the sense I was talking about earlier, in its theological sense, then we kind of have to start thinking how the notion of the subject, of the human being as a subject, as an individual, is constructed through these apparatuses. So that is really the main point that Heidegger discusses in the question concerning technology. What is the question concerning technology? What is the question there? The question is to put very, very simply, is that it's not us who use technology. It's technology that makes us who we are. Yeah, this is absolutely key. I mean, if you just understand, if you just kind of wrap your head around this idea, which sounds very, very simple, technology creates us, not the other way around. Bam, bingo, you solved the whole conundrum of post-structuralist thought to a large extent. That's what I think, in different ways, all of it is driving towards it. So what is, yeah?
So say that the weather is the greatest is technology, and everything else is what makes us. That's what, or is it from?
Well, technology makes us.
So that basically I'm saying nature is included in that.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's even before people like Lyotard, even in Adorno, you will find there is no such thing as nature. The whole idea that there is kind of nature and culture is already ideology. The whole distinction, you know, the whole idea that you can kind of leave the city and walk somewhere into the countryside and be one with nature is a ideological myth.
Yeah. Okay. By nature, that would mean physics, I suppose.
Okay, well, we'll come to physics in a minute.
Yeah.
We'll come to physics. And isn't physics an apparatus?
Yeah.
Heidegger says yes. And Lyotard says yes. I mean, Lyotard here is very close to Heidegger. What he does, basically what Lyotard does, he injects Heidegger with a good, healthy dose of Freud. That's what he does at this stage of his writing. Yes? No?
Just concurs with you thinking back about reading the skip.
But also I think what I want to get to, and what we will get to, is the way art comes into the picture in Lyotard. Because I think that is really fascinating, especially as you're all artists, so I think we might have an interesting discussion about it. So just to repeat, the key thing to grasp is that technology creates us as subjects. Now, to explain that, you know, in a sense, here everyone, Lyotard and Heidegger, all go back to Marx. They all go back to school. Because Marx taught that, what Marx taught, to put it bluntly, that labor, work, is the basis. Everything else comes later. Ideas, politics, it all comes after labor. Marx basically came and said the one thing that philosophers ignored is that before everything else there is work. That's why the workers for Marx are key, you know, because without them there would be nothing. But what does it mean? It also means that work makes us. You know, we don't come to the field, to the laboratory, to the workshop as formed human beings and then go and make our things. It is through the making that we become who we are. Yeah, so that's quite simple, kind of originally Marxian, not Marxian, but Marxian idea. It can also get complicated because Marx had obviously the distinction between base and superstructure. We're not going to go into that, but I just wanted to just be very, very clear to that. Whenever you hear people saying something like, oh, well, you know, and given that technology is made by humans, then wrong. Technology is not made by humans. You know, stop right there. It's humans who are made by technology. Yeah? When we became human, according to my third grade school teacher, we became human when we picked a tool from the ground. Yeah? Okay, so what does it mean? It means that before we picked the tool from the ground, we were not human. We were something else. So it's the tool that makes you the human being that you are. You know, there's a company that does shoes and also earth-moving equipment, Caterpillar. You know what is their slogan? It's something like, men make machines, machines make men. Or something like, oh, something like that, yeah. Of course, that's quite dodgy, yeah? But it's the other way around. Machines make men. Then men go and make things. So it's almost like, I know, it's a crazy thought, but what if, before there was anything else, there was technology? What if, in order for there to be anything at all, there has to be technology, economy? So then suddenly you kind of realize that you could almost see the economy and the libido as, in a sense, much less opposites, almost belonging, almost sharing the same space. So far, all I wanted to establish is 3 or 4 keywords: economy, which relates to the word technology, which relates to the word apparatus, which relates to the word dispositif, which is the French for apparatus. These 4 words basically form one. So when we talk about economy, we also talk about technology. However, and that's the caveat, we don't understand technology in the sense of tools, means to an end, but we understand technology as that which makes us what we are. By that, yeah.
Of course, question, you only talking about technology and being a human being. At what point does technology start to make us, as you say, pick up the tool, makes us a human being, but the tool is a form of technology? Mm-hmm.
Well, it's a very good question. And the best answer for that is a short essay by Heidegger that's called The Thing. In Bremen, in the Bremen lectures, is the first short essay, 5 pages or something, where he speaks about the making of a jug. And he was saying there how this kind of basic form of technology, like a jug or a wooden spoon, you know, or a pair of shoes, always captures something. I mean, it always captures something of the human essence. The jug has something of the holding about it and the outpouring. It's almost like it's almost like there is something almost animate. It's almost like it has a soul. And its soul is some aspect of human existence. In that case, the holding and the offering, for instance. I'm not sure if that answers your question. But, you know, this is such a crazy thing to say, that it's technology that makes the human. that it is really like, you know, you need to be in a kind of Alice in Wonderland situation for that to start to make any kind of sense. But that's what these guys want you to do. That's why they write all these crazy books. Because at stake is looking at the world in a completely different way to the way we've been used to. And I used to think that, you know, if you didn't take your mushrooms, if you didn't take your LSD or whatever, you're never going to get any of that. But I think now I think that it's not the case. There are many ways you can get into it, but you sort of need to be able to live the everyday thinking. It's all about abandoning completely everything to do with common sense. It's all about uncommon sense.
That's why we're here.
And that's why it's also political, because clearly, if you want to speak about feminism, you need to abandon common sense. If you want to speak about art, you need to abandon common sense. If you don't want to speak about oppression, about right is might, about zero-sum politics, so anyway, we will open the book in a minute, but I just wanted to tell you what is at stake in the title. And we only spoke about economy. Yeah, we didn't even touch the libidinal. And we're not going to talk a lot about the libidinal aspect of it because I'm kind of less interested in reading Lyotard through Freud. I'm much more interested in reading him through the question of technology and Heidegger. Maybe the time of Freud just a little past. I don't know. This is just my my own sense. But we will talk about it in a minute. So yeah.
Talk about technology.
What is technology?
No, so it seems to be everything. So what isn't technology?
What isn't technology? Well, you see, in the modern age, and it's a brilliant question, and you probably know the answer, yeah?
Yeah, of course.
There is. How can one get out of technology? Is that what you're asking?
I suppose, yeah. I'm trying to.
How can one get out of technology? To die. I'm not sure it will work. I think isn't dying also a technology?
If technology is what makes us being, does it make other things being?
Technology, no.
Makes us humans.
No. Technology does not make us being. Technology makes us subjects, human beings. So the distinction here is between the Parmenidean being, for whom thought and being are the same, the being that creates in thinking, yeah, and the modern subject, the modern human subject. What does it mean to try to get out of technology? Let's try to get out of technology. Let's switch over the lights.
Well, I was going to become a chimpanzee.
The chimpanzee. Well, I don't know about the chimpanzee, but I know that if I try to step out of technology, it just seems an impossible task. You know, I can strip naked, I can switch the lights, I can throw away all this technology out of the window. I will not be able to stop looking at the world technologically because I'm already, you know, my eyes are like monitors. Sorry?
I said we are part of it without trying.
Well, because it made us. Here is an example I sometimes give to my students. Do you know Dolly the sheep? Dolly the sheep? Yeah? So what is about the sheep? Why it's called Dolly? Clone. Yeah. Okay. What does it mean that it was that she was cloned? Yeah, it means that Dolly the sheep was made artificially in a laboratory. Yeah, by combining some things in a test tube, implanting them in the womb, and then Dolly came out. Okay. So imagine Dolly sitting here between us around this table. Yeah? Would be nice, no? So, okay. And now we go around and we ask everyone, what is technology for you? So I will say, well, for me, technology is my iPod, is that I can speak to my sister on Skype, you know, and things like that, you know. Okay, and then we go to Dolly and we ask Dolly, what is technology for you? And what do you think Dolly will say? Good answer. Good answer. And I have a Google Translate here.
Say that again.
So what will be the answer for Dolly when you ask her what is technology for you?
She may say it's something I don't know and I can't understand.
Well,
and it's probably something we should say as well.
Okay.
It exists, but we don't know what it is.
Imagine that you were made in a laboratory, in a test tube, and then implanted in someone's womb, and then you grew up. And then I will ask you, what is technology for you?
Something gave me birth. Yeah.
In other words, life.
Life. Yeah.
Okay, so for Dolly the sheep, technology is life. Technology is what gave her life. And what I'm trying to argue, what I'm trying to put to you, is that it's not much of a stretch to see that we are not that different from Dolly the sheep. Maybe in degree, but there is no. That's you know why she was called Dolly. It's really really interesting. It's a. There's interesting politics in this name. That's what I want to say for now. But so you see what technology means. Technology means life. For Dolly the sheep. For us, it's harder to think about it in that way because we like to think that technology is something that you go to the Apple store for. But otherwise, technology is something that we purchase, use, replace, upgrade, troubleshoot, throw, discard, dispose. But no, not for Dolly. And also, I think ultimately, not for us. And not only because we might have bionic arms and legs. No, because all our consciousness, all our sense of being is configured, prefigured, formed, and formatted by technology. So, I think you start to see what is at stake here in the question of technology. That is economy. That's my way of addressing the title. So it is technology of desire. It starts to make a bit more sense why technology is libidinal. Let's see what the man says. Do you want to maybe... Okay, so we're turning now to the tensor. And just to retract 2 steps, 2 steps backwards, 1 step forward. So retract 2 steps to say what is at stake here for Lyotard. And maybe we can start from reading. So who could read us the first paragraph of the tensor? Will you read?
Yes.
Thank you, John. John, yeah. So we just start from semiotic sign, just the first paragraph from let's to receive. or maybe even less. I will stop you in a few lines.
Let's take up this business of science once more.
Hold on. Can you please read much slower, because everyone needs to be able to listen to that. And this is very, very key.
Let's take up this business of science once more. You have not understood. You have remained rationalists, semioticians, Westerners. Let's emphasize it again. It is the road towards libidinal currency that must be opened up by force. What the semioticians maintain is that must be opened up by force. What the semioticians maintain as a hypothesis beneath their discourse is that the thing of which they speak may always be treated as a sign. And this sign, in its turn, is indeed thought within the network of concepts belonging to the theory of communication. It is what replaces something for theory of... it is what replaces something for someone, says Pierce, repeats Levi Strauss, which means that the thing is posited as a message, that is, as a medium enriched with a sequence of coded elements, and that its addressee, himself in possession of this code, is capable, through decoding the message, of retrieving the information that the sender meant him to receive.
Great, thank you very much. So what is happening here? How do you hear that? How about the hidden people that sit behind? Do you have any thoughts about that? No. And you, sir, because I hardly see you yet. Do you have any thoughts about that? No. Okay. Anyone from there? No. Here? Nothing? Okay. So let's take up this business of science once more. So let's take up the business of science. For you have not understood. You have remained rationalists. Does it ring a bell? Rationalists? Yeah? Heidegger? Yeah? You have remained rationalists. Semioticians. Westerners. So these are all curse words. Yeah, he is basically swearing. Let's emphasize it again. It is the road towards libidinal currency that must be opened up by force. What the semioticians maintain as a hypothesis beneath their discourse is, and now listen very carefully, is that the thing of which they speak may always be treated as a sign. What does it mean to treat a thing as a sign?
Representative.
Yeah, to represent it. But there are other words we can use. It also means to objectify. You know, that's the political dimension. It also means to reify. Have you ever come across the word reification?
A Marxist term.
It's a Marxist term, exactly. Adorno uses it a lot. Marx uses it a lot. What does it mean to reify something? It's from the Latin word res, which means thing. It means to thingify. Yeah? Don't thingify me. Don't objectify me. Don't make me into a thing. Don't make me into an object. Yeah? Don't pluck me out of a kind of flow. So, what the semioticians maintain as a hypothesis beneath their discourse is that the thing of which they speak may always be treated as a sign. Again, what does it mean to say that? Let's try to unpick these words in this sentence. Who are the semioticians? It's shorthand for what? What does it mean? What to say semioticians? Semiotics. It's to do with language, yeah. It's to do with science, yeah. It's the study of science. Any famous semioticians? Yeah, very good, yeah. Ferdinand de Saussure. The General Course of Linguistics. Yeah, precisely that. And Levi-Strauss. the great French anthropologist, that all of these people have a go at. He is the kind of poster boy for bad, because he is very easy to use as a bad example, because Lévi-Strauss took semiotics to anthropology. Yeah, semiotics generally deals with understanding how language operates in order to explain how meaning is created, how words refer to things, and what are the rules of that relation. Lévi-Strauss, by the way, do you know the Levi's, the jeans? That's his brother. Levi-Strauss took the same approach to anthropology. So then, of course, it's very easy to put accusations of racism at him, and it's very easy to then to implicate semiotics in this whole kind of objectifying political move. But let's discuss a little bit in more detail how that happens. For Lyotard, semiotics is really the key problem that he is arguing against. And why? What is the problem with semiotics? The answer is in this one sentence, what the semioticians maintain as a hypothesis. What does it mean to say that something is a hypothesis?
A possibility.
No.
No.
Presupposed. Yeah, yeah, exactly. Hypothesis is something that is taken as a given, taken for granted. When you have a hypothesis, it means it's something that is the basis of your discourse, the ground of your discourse. Yeah, groundless ground, but that's not a ground, that's grounded ground. Yeah, not just the ground. It's something that you don't need necessarily to spell out. It is at the base. So, you know, one of these presuppositions that guide massive amounts of contemporary discussion is that technology is means to an end. Is technology is something that we are using for our own benefit. They're just taken as a given. And every discussion you will come across about new technologies, the internet, social media, people will always be saying how it can be used, what is its impact on, you know, individuals or societies, and whatever. What is being taken as a given is that technology is a means to an end, is a tool to use. Yeah? So that's a hypothesis. So you need to pay attention to that. So what the semioticians maintain as a hypothesis, another way to think about hypothesis is illegal import. It's a contraband. It's something that is brought in without being declared. Beneath their discourse, yeah, beneath the discourse, so that is the discourse, the hypothesis is coming in the kind of, in the double side, in the kind of fake suitcase, you know, when you have a kind of a space to smuggle things. That's how something is brought in. So what is brought in, what is smuggled in beneath the discourse, is that the thing of which they speak may always be treated as a sign. So what is being smuggled is this idea that the thing, which can be a text, which can be an object, yeah, whatever, but it is treated as a sign. Now, what does it mean to treat something as a sign? That's the next thing we need to unpick. And this sign, in its turn, is indeed thought. The thing may always be understand. And this sign, in its turn, is indeed thought within the network of concepts belonging to the theory of communication. It is what replaces something for someone. Says Peirce, repeats Lévi-Strauss, which means that the thing is posited as a message. Yeah, underline the word message in your text because that is the absolute. So what the semioticians managed to smuggle into the discourse? Sorry?
This hypothesis.
The hypothesis, yeah, but what is the hypothesis? What is the ground according to this one sentence? I really want you to look at this one sentence and try to kind of pick it, open it up, crack it open. What the semioticians maintain as a hypothesis. Can you read this to us? This one sentence from here up to just one very long sentence. These people never use full stops. You can start from here.
What the semioticians maintain as an hypothesis beneath their discourse is that the thing of which they speak may always be treated as a sign. And this sign in its turn is indeed thought within the network of concepts belonging to the theory of communication. It is what replaces something for someone, says Peirce, repeats Levi-Strauss, which means that the thing is posited as a message. The T is as a medium enriched with a sequence of coded elements, and that its addressee, himself in possession of this code, is capable through decoding the message of retrieving the information that the sender meant him to receive.
Okay, good. I mean, we could simplify this sentence considerably because there is a lot here that is unnecessary. But semioticians smuggle something into the discourse. So basically, by dint or by virtue of engaging in a semiotic discourse, you already take something as a given. You already take something for granted. The question is what you take something for granted. What is the hypothesis? The hypothesis is that the thing is posited as a message. This is really important. This is really, really key. What does it mean? Well, for one thing, it means that the thing has no value on its own, but it is basically a symbol or a sign or a stand-in or an understudy for something else, yeah, which is the message. So what is he actually arguing against here in the first opening salvo of this chapter? He is arguing against the compulsion to ask about meaning. Meaning is the question here. Why, he asks, should we take it as a given? Why should we take for granted that signs have meaning? Or at least, is it possible that signs have something else going for them apart from meaning? Do you have a hinge? What is this thing that might be there which is apart from meaning?
So identity.
What could be going on there apart from meaning? What Lyotard wants to rescue from the sign and bring forward is some kind of belonging together. That's the libidinal. Yeah? Belonging together is something we picked from Heidegger, from identity and difference. Yeah? The belonging, the emphasis on belonging, which for Heidegger was lost in the history of the West, which drove towards rationality and reason. And when rationality and reason become the way by which the world is experienced, what is lost is this intimate connection this notion of intimacy or belonging. Well, you probably know from various instances in life, some things, if you rationalize them, they disappear. Yeah? If you try to rationalize why you love someone, there is no room for love at that moment. There cannot be belonging and rationality, in a sense. That's what Heidegger was saying. And what Lyotard is trying to point to is that semiotics, or semiology, as it is called, or the study of signs, takes as a given that signs have meaning, and it also, ipso facto, takes as a given that that's all signs are, which means they have no existence of their own. Signs are just indicators, pointers towards some external reality. Yeah? And Lyotard wants us to remember, he wrote that after Heidegger, he wants us to remember that it's also possible to say that sign and meaning are the same. Signs don't point to any external content. They can be themselves some kind of content. So it's almost like saying that if we speak about language for a second, that words, we don't need necessarily to think about words as representations of external reality. In traditional linguistics, the general explanation of the way language operates is that the words of the language are arbitrary signs. What does it mean, arbitrary signs? I think that, in English we say horse, in French we say cheval, in Russian we say loshet, and these are kind of arbitrary connections of sounds that designate something in the real world. Yeah, the word itself is kind of replaceable. We can agree that something else, tra-la-la, means a horse, and that's fine. As long as we agree, we can all carry on. It shouldn't be any problem. That's exactly the issue for Leo. He says, if you treat language in that way, if you treat existence in that way, something is being irreparably lost. So it's very similar lament, a very similar kind of warning sign to the one Heidegger was placing. Yeah? What is being lost? This intimacy of being, this sense that language is also a force in the world. It's also thought and being are the same. Language and being are the same. Language is not a representation of being. It is being. This is for us a very high mountain to climb. That's not how we were taught. In other cultures, and I really don't like this when people start talking about some kind of primitive, in inverted commas, tribes, and how there everything is so supposedly, so intimately connected, and it just seems to me quite dodgy. However, what needs to be said is that there is something very particular about the Western insistence on language as being this empty signifier. For instance, you know how in the mystical traditions, for instance, in the Hebrew mystical tradition, the so-called Kabbalah, or words are not just indicators; they are forces in themselves. Yeah. So the magician's apprentice can utter certain syllables, and then things happen. So words can have their own power in mysticism. And basically, I think that's really the way to understand Lyotard. In the mystical traditions, throughout the cultures, words are not a representation of power, they are power. If you know the right expressions, you can unlock the doors of heaven. You can say Sesame, for instance, in the Arabian Nights. and unlock the Aladdin cave. So it's the word itself that does it. Yeah? It's a very different way of thinking about language than saying that words are just floating signifiers and you can replace them at will and nothing will really change. So is Lyotard here, is he calling for us to abandon rationality in favor of some kind of mystical experience? The answer is yes. I think that's how I think of it. In a sense, it's basically saying everything that we achieved in the last 2,000 or 2,500 years of history is undoubtedly great. There are various things you wouldn't want to go back to. You wouldn't want to go back to slavery. You wouldn't want to lose the Declaration of Human Rights. You wouldn't want to lose wonderful art and poetry and literature and amazing achievements that rationality brought as its kind of fruit. However, in this wonderful journey of conquest, something was also lost. And that something that was lost is somehow connected to the mystical experience of being one with the world, of this sense of oneness. Another way of talking about it is the sense of just being presence in the moment. Yeah? And talking about semiotics here, for Lyotard, is just a way to sharpen and to really point towards our way of thinking about meaning discloses what we also forgot. We forgot that language and being, thought and being are the same. So, you know, that's this first sentence, and you know, it's really lovely the way he starts. Let us take up this business of science once more. For you have not understood, you have remained rationalists, semioticians, Westerners. How he uses these three words as basically having the same meaning: Westerner, rationalist, semiotician. So then you understand that any time he mentions later the semiotics, you can replace it with Western thinking or rationality. It's basically an attack on rationality. Now, clearly, what does it mean to attack rationality? What does it mean to attack rationality in the book of philosophy? Isn't that a kind of doomed enterprise?
Because you've got to reason in a book with words, you've got to use words.
Isn't philosophy itself a product of rationality? Isn't the printing press a product of the same rationality, and the words on this paper are, yeah, and the answer is yes. And that's why it makes this project so difficult. So what Lyotard needs to do is to use, I mean, we don't have anything else. Rationality is all we have. However, he says we can point towards something that was forgotten. We don't have the tools to just bring it back and put it in front of you, because doing that will immediately make it part of the semiotic order of signification. Yeah? We cannot do that. All we can do is kind of hint at, point at, you know, wink and nod that something was also lost and forgotten. And as long as we can remember that something was forgotten, we're kind of doing okay. But what we shouldn't be doing, and what Lyotard warns us from doing, is to somehow assume that we have the whole picture. Yeah? So that's why, in a sense, it's okay to write a book. It's okay to use the same language, the same semiotic structures that he's also fighting against. I mean, isn't he himself a semiotician, a Westerner, a rationalist? We all are. However, we have still some ammunition. We have poetry, we have art, we have sex, we have the libido. So why these things become important? Because these are the kind of elements that we still carry with us into this rational universe of others. You know, poetry is not rational. Sex is not rational. Art is not rational. That's kind of why it also explains a lot about why these books are written in such a difficult style. It's almost like you have to make these texts into an art object in order to escape the trap of rationality. Yeah? So in a sense, so while you read a text and it looks like a text and it smells like a text and it feels like a text, really what you're looking at is an art object. And basically what Lyotard presents us with here is a kind of sculpture, conceptual sculpture, that the kind of shape he makes, and we maintain in our corrective brain that now exists somewhere in this state. That's what it is. It looks like a book, but it's sort of it's also deceptive. It also gives us a certain hope for our own writing, our own art, because these things become suddenly not the icing on the cake, not kind of the mad uncle in the attic is like doing watercolors or something like that. You know, it really becomes our saving grace, the only hope, or the only kind of bastion where we can remember that something was forgotten. Now that's why for Heidegger, Hölderlin poetry is so crucially important, why he always goes back to these poems. You will see when you read the question. Why Heidegger is so obsessed with poetry? Because in poetry, language appears the way it really can be, the way it can really maintain some kind of intimate connection with being. For Lyotard, it is painting mostly, but also other art. So have a look at the second paragraph. But they start to make sense in this? What is his angle of attack here? What he has at his sides, and why it is a really Heideggerian argument. Heidegger doesn't talk about semiotics. Heidegger talks about rationality. Heidegger talks about the Western tradition. But Lyotard, in the first sentence, shows you that for him these things are all one. He will continue talking about semiotics throughout this first chapter, because he finds semiology and semiotics an easy ground, an easy example. But don't be fooled, it's not about semiotics. Now, I had this discussion with Johnny the other day, precisely about that, because I was thinking that it's quite tempting to say that Lyotard sort of against semiotics and signification, and he says we need to find another way of dealing with language. But there is also another way you can think about it, and you could sort of say he is not trying to abandon the sign. He is not saying that signs are bad. He's just saying signs are too important to leave them for the semioticians. Now, to show you what are we to show you where are we going with it, look at on the same page, in the second paragraph, there is one sentence in the middle, somewhere here. It starts from when it says, one could say that the sign replaces what it signifies. Yeah, in semiotics. The sign replaces what it signifies. The message replaces the information. This is, to put it as brutally as possible, the Platonism of the theory of ideas. So, the sign replaces what it signifies. So, the problem with semiotics and signification is that behind every sign there is another sign. You can never get, there's never anything in the end of the line. And that's why people talk about floating signifiers in semiotics. Behind every signification there is another signification, and there is just this endless chain. Go to page 43, and in the middle of the page there is this paragraph that starts from, see what you have done. Can someone read 4 lines from that? From C to terms. Could someone read it for us? Yeah? Thank you.
See what you have done. The material is immediately annihilated. Where there is a message, there is no material. Adorno said this admirably of Schoenberg.
Yeah.
The material, he explained, in surrealism does not count as such, but only as a relation between terms.
Okay, now, Lyotard is difficult. Yeah, did I say that already? He is difficult. So he's not really making it easy. But I think we can unpick what he says here. And it's really important. See what you have done. The material is immediately annihilated. Why? What does it mean? Why there is no material?
Replaced by sign.
Exactly. Because now there are only signs. Yeah, that's semiotics. Now, and then the next sentence, which I find is just so wonderful. Where there is a message, there is no material. Write it down, tattoo it on your biceps. This is the key. Where there is a message, there is no material. You want to have materialism? You want to speak about something that really matters? Forget signifiers, forget messages, forget meaning. Meaning and materials don't go together. Meaning dissolves materiality. So, the moment you ask, yeah, but what does it mean? You're not dealing with materials anymore. You're not a materialist. Who are you?
Rationalist.
A rationalist, idealist, a semiotician, a Westerner, a castrator. He has various names for all of that. But this is so much the key. You know how so often people talk about materialism, especially also in the context, for instance, of new media. They say, oh, but, online, kind of everything is immaterial. And it's very irritating, all this stuff, because people don't understand what material is. And I guess there is nothing more elusive than the material. We will have this conversation, I guess, some other time. But Lyotard makes it very clear that as long as you are searching for meaning, you're not going to find the material. Why? Let me just try to point out. Searching for meaning is logos. It's the work of reason. Yeah? You search for meaning. Okay, how we get to meaning? How we get to knowledge? How do we know something?
By understanding it.
Okay, That's one way. Another way?
Experiencing.
Experiencing it. Okay. Association. Yeah. Would it be so wrong to say that there are basically two ways we have to get to knowledge? One is through reason, logic, experience, call it as you like, senses. The sensorial data still needs to be somehow processed before it becomes kind of useful information. So that's one way to get to knowledge. The other is revelation. Yeah? It's the voice of God. That's another. How do we know that there is kind of good and bad? You know, if I say, okay, for next week, everyone writes a 2,000 word essay, but you write a 5,000 word essay. How do you know that it's wrong? You know, it's just wrong. Yeah. So.
Thank you.
Well, it's hard because everyone wants to write a 5,000 word essay. But so these two forms of knowledge, and the message he's talking about here is the way of getting to knowledge through reason, through rationality, through logical operations, through technology. Yeah. So where there is message, there is no material. Now, all of a sudden, Adorno makes an appearance. Adorno said this admirably of Schoenberg. The material, he explained, in serialism does not count as such, but only as a relation between terms. It's a very obscure reference, but I think it's also very useful, and I found a way of kind of slightly making it work. Adorno spent a long time writing about modernist or classical music. Schoenberg is a kind of famous 20th century composer. Now, and I went to the text where Adorno speaks about it and to try to understand this reference. So what Adorno finds so appealing in Schoenberg is that in his compositions, the notes don't follow any particular scale. You know, the C major, for instance. They don't follow a scale. They come from different places. So, in a sense, if you could say that music composed according to scale or according to the laws of harmony takes as its center the human ear and the human sensitivity. Yeah, because what is harmonious or disharmonious is kind of all judged by the way it is appearing to the human ear. In Schoenberg, the human ear is kind of discarded, and the scale and the harmony are discarded towards just sounds. So sounds don't belong to a series. They don't belong to any kind of continuity. It's not a question of whether it is a pleasing or a disturbing or a sad or a happy melody. Each sound is just a cause for another sound, and that's it. Yeah, it's difficult, but modernism is very much like that. You could also think about Kandinsky, for instance, in these terms. Yeah, a line does not necessarily lead to a shape. A line is just an excuse to draw another line, or a circle, or a triangle. You know, what does it mean? It means that we are presented here with a different kind of logic, a different way of making sense, which does not take the human ear or the human eye or the human perspective as its basis. Yeah, this is really important, and also you can see how it directly links to kind of all the concerns we all have about art. Now, so I have this example. You might think it's a really silly example. That's fine, but I used it when we had this conference here a a couple of months ago around the photograph. And but this example is based on what Adorno said. So you know this television program, MasterChef. Do you watch it? No? I think you should watch it when it comes again. It's so educational. It's really, I mean, I make all my students watch it. But they hate me for it because it shows them what is at stake, really, too. But, so, you know how MasterChef, just for those of you who don't watch television, is all about, it's a kind of cooking competition. Yeah? So people make various exquisite dishes. Now, as a viewer of this program, it's a program about food, in short. But as a viewer of this program, can you taste the food? You cannot. Is it tasty or not? We don't know. This food then doesn't play any part in, let's say, tasty, untasty series. You couldn't categorize it like this. You couldn't also say, oh, I feel completely full, completely stuffed after watching this program, I couldn't even have, another bite. So it's not satiating in that sense, So it also doesn't fit within categories of being hungry or not hungry. Yeah. So what then it's about? That's how Schoenberg here works. So he's talking here about music that is not dealing with the human perspective, or in the same way that MasterChef is not dealing with a normal perspective on food. But every dish in MasterChef is just a kind of jumping off point to another dish. Every event of presenting some kind of food for the judges is a libidinal event of sensation. It can be a moment of excitement or of disappointment. These are the kind of categories that operate here, yeah? Because it's food, but it's food that works within a different series, not within the series of hunger at all, but within a series of kind of sexual satisfaction. Now, or some kind of satisfaction. Some dishes are praised, others are condemned, or critiqued. And each dish just serves as a kind of jumping off point to another dish. Yeah? What do you do after you present this plate? You go and do another one, and then another one. So each plate is just a jumping off point to another one. So then you realize that food has additional power to just being nourishment or calories or whatever. It can also be a jumping off point to another place. Yeah? Now that might not sound as much, but that's really all the tensor is about. This is the tensor. Yeah, that is the tension. When a plate of food is just an excuse to make another one, or to move to another place, or to cry, or to jump from joy, that's when we are in the tensor territory.
Is it the rhythm in the rhythm?
The rhythm and the rhythm come into that definitely, not in Lyotard, but as I was saying earlier, Lyotard, Deleuze and Guattari, it's very, very close. And actually, he just a little bit later, on the next page, he already talking about rhythm. And you are absolutely right. It's just that, it's almost like we can say, well, there are all these books. We could ask for the meaning in each one of these books. Or we could just put them on the table, and then it's not about meaning, it is about some kind of series. So each book becomes just an excuse or an event or a jumping off point. And doesn't Heidegger talk about this leaping off into the unknown? So each one becomes a kind of a leaping station to another space, to another place. So modern music, or modern classical music, it's all about that. according to Adorno, as quoted by Lyotard. That's what he calls serialism. So you're absolutely right. The material, he explained, in serialism does not count as such, but only as a relation between items. So the material is just a launching pad to another space. So it's almost like to say, well, a sign has something else besides meaning. In the same way that a plate of food has something else besides calories, carbohydrates, and proteins, it also has a kind of libidinal element to it, because it can be, in the context of MasterChef, a cause for joy or sadness or something like that. So that's how this event of food escapes or shows that there is something else besides signification. That's how a sound is not only part of a scale, a harmony, but a moment of relation between terms. So here Lyotard rescues something from the sign which the semioticians can never grasp. The question is whether it's worth doing, whether it is really such a big fish he caught. Now he's going to spend the rest of this chapter to show you that, yeah, this is a big fish. But that's precisely what is going on. It's just to say, we're not abandoning the sign. We're not leaving the sign to the semioticians. We're not going somewhere else. We're staying in the sign. We just say there is something else there besides meaning and signification. A sign can also be a moment of excitement, of this libidinal experience, of pleasure, pain, desire, call it what you like, art. Yeah? So these are the things that the semioticians will never see in the sign, because they come in with their contraband of meaning. Does it make sense so far? Yeah? I feel that there is a kind of second echelon. So I don't know. What do you think?
I quite like the MasterChef idea, because I find it very strange watching people make food on TV. I find it really strange, because you're watching people make something that's sort of satisfying for everybody, but yeah, you can't experience it. It's something that you can't grasp. So, are you saying that's a similar way that semiotics work?
Well, I'm saying that semiotics, semiotics cannot explain that. In semiotics, let's say, to go to MasterChef example, food has direct connection with, let's say, eating or hunger. Food, hunger. There is the meaning of food, and of course we're doing here a bit of a kind of vandalism, but if food has a message, this message is hungry, not hungry, or tasty, untasty. Yeah? So for instance, where a restaurant critic goes to a restaurant and then writes in the paper how, one thing was, evaluated according, it's always evaluated according to the same criteria, how tasty it was, or where it was on the tasty and untasty scale. The restaurant critic there works as a semiotician, because he basically interprets the meaning of each plate of food according to this one scale. However, the same restaurant critic will have very little to say about MasterChef as a viewer, yeah, because then there is a very different logic in place. It's not the logic of taste. You cannot judge anything you see there based on taste. And what's your experience when you watch this program? You feel various, you sense various things, yeah? So it is purely libidinal experience, you know? Then it's not something that you can judge according to the tasty, not tasty scale. There is a different scale. Titillation, excitement, remorse, I don't know, various things like that. So I'm not really considering this example as a particularly great one, but it's just a useful way. For instance, what will happen if we will watch an orchestra on television with the sound turned off? When there is no sound, then there will still be something going on, but it will not be the music. It will be maybe then the relationship between the members of the orchestra. You know, the bored person of the triangle, you know, or something like that. We will have to somehow address it in a libidinal way. So that's I think where Lyotard is taking us. He's not suggesting that we will evacuate the sign. He is not saying you will find materiality somewhere else. He will say, no, it is in the sign itself that you will find the libidinal. Or, to use the Heideggerian language, and it could be that here Lyotard offers a sort of correction to Heidegger's lectures in Identity and Difference. Because Heidegger sort of says, well, we need to step out of Western thinking entirely. We need to leap out of metaphysics. We need to leap out of the sign into this unknown, into the unthought. And that's how he ends up in the Nazi party, yeah? As the leap into the unknown. Now, Lyotard knows all that, and he kind of says, well, perhaps it's not the leap into the unknown we need to take. We need to stay right where we are, but we need to deal with this where we are in a different way. Because the leap clearly didn't end up very well. So that's one way to think about it. Turn now to page 44 and here is his attack on semiotics. Can someone read a couple of lines for us? Could you read for us? Could you read for us? Yeah. Okay. And you there. Thank you very much. So, if you start from not only, and 6 or 7 lines down where it says lead, must lead.
Not only is the material commuted into a sign term, but also the thing which the sign replaces is itself another sign. There is nothing but signs. First consequence, the relation is therefore an infinite postponement, and thus sets up recurrence as a fundamental trait of the system. The reiteration of the postponement of the signifier, guaranteeing that one will always need to work to determine the terms to which, in a given corpus, the term under examination can and must lead.
Okay, very good, thank you. So here is basically summarizing in 6 lines everything that Derrida said in off-grammatology in about 600 difficult pages. So it's just useful to understand what is then the problem with semiotics. Yeah. Now I think it's also quite pertinent because semiotics are still, semiotics are taught a lot in universities, and I recently was in a departmental meeting when we were discussing kind of the curriculum for the next few years, and semiotics is really still very much on the agenda in in media studies, in cultural studies departments. So what is the problem? How do you critique semiotics? not only is the material commuted into a sign term, but also the thing which the sign replaces is itself another sign. Yeah? So behind every sign, if you look what is behind the sign, you will find another sign. There is nothing but signs. So if you read Baudrillard, you know, and you're probably forced to do it sometimes, that is the kind of Baudrillard notion of the simulacra. First consequence, the relation is therefore an infinite postponement, and thus sets up recurrence as a fundamental trait of the system. Postponement, it means that behind this sign there is another sign, there is another sign, there is another sign. We are caught in this endless repetition of the search for what is behind the sign, but all we find is another sign, guaranteeing that one will always need to work to determine the terms to which in a given corpus the term under examination can and must lead. What is interesting, you mentioned the rhythm earlier, yeah? What is interesting is while you don't see it here in Lyotard yet, but when Deleuze and Guattari will write their 1,000 Plateaus a few years after that book, but this book came out between them writing Anti-Oedipus and 1,000 Plateaus, then they will say, they will get hold of precisely that, and they will say, yeah, there is this rhythm of peeling a sign, finding another sign, finding another sign, but this repetition itself contains a certain meaning. The recurrence, what Lyotard here calls, sets up a recurrence as a fundamental trait of the system. They will say, yeah, but this recurrence is not just recurrence, it has meaning. I mean, there is a rhythm to it. And when you have a rhythm is something sensual. It's like, it involves the body, you know, rhythmic trance. Rhythm creates a certain, it's something physical. So the moment you have rhythm, you already established a kind of meaning. And it's interesting that this meaning here, the meaning of the rhythm is established not by the meaning of the sign, but by the fact that behind the sign there is another sign. So that's how MasterChef operates. It just creates a rhythm between different elements. That's how Schoenberg operates. The different notes create a certain rhythm. So it's not about saying, oh, that's one scale and that's another scale. But it's just that apart from belonging to scales, apart from belonging to harmonies, apart from belonging to some kind of perspective of the human ear, these sounds also create a rhythm. And then think about Kandinsky, think about any one of your favorite abstract modernists, and you will see that it's all about the rhythm. Yeah? Or anyone here looked at the Google Art project? Yeah? I mean, fascinating. Go in the Google Art project to the Museum of Modern Art and look at Van Gogh's Starry Night. Yeah? And if you, the Google Art project allows you to zoom incredibly closely, so it's the technology they used is absolutely fascinating. That's a different discussion. But you can see the painting as closely as someone who is restoring the painting will see. You basically can see every fiber of the threads that made the canvas. When you look at the painting that close, you realize that Van Gogh didn't paint the trees and the stars and the sky. No, he was kind of laying down a kind of rhythm, just hitting the canvas with a brush, setting up one rhythm, then breaking it and starting another one. And that's how you paint. You don't paint things. Things kind of happen because you get into a rhythm. And I think people who dance might sort of find some connection with that. I think everyone who painted, you know, I don't know what would you think? Does it make sense?
Isn't that the case with all things? One thing is often
it's not so much that one thing follows another, but it's that one thing follows another, but this following contours something or traces something out. Yeah. So basically, what I'm trying to say is that when we might think that when the painter has this beautiful line of trees kind of fading into the distance, and the little church and the stars, just stands there and says, okay, now first I will draw the star, and I will draw the tree, and I will draw the church. But when you look at the canvas very closely, what you realize is that there are none of these things present there. All that is present is
like pixels.
like pixels, yeah, but even not so much like pixels, but almost like a drummer doing sort of, and this drumming with the brush, it's the drumming, but it also creates these shapes, but it's not the shapes really. The shapes kind of almost secondary. They happen because of the rhythm. Yeah, and you can ask, yeah, but why this? What is the connection between the rhythm and the shapes that you get in the end? And that becomes a really interesting question about, how to think about art. But you could almost then say that it is the desire to build the rhythm that makes the trees and the stars and the church and everything else which is present in the painting. So, but it's the rhythm that underpins the whole process. Now, I might be completely wrong in saying that, but isn't it also true that in poetry, rhythm comes before the words? In many classical poems, for instance, you start from the rhythm. You start from a hexameter, for instance. Yeah. Isn't it also interesting how early philosophy was generally done through walking, peripatetically, and then walking is a rhythm, isn't it? And don't you notice that if you have a conversation while walking, then the walking itself lends a certain rhythm to the discourse, and maybe the discourse is just the way words wrap themselves around a certain rhythm you create. Yeah. So what I'm suggesting here is to kind of turn things around, rather than looking at the rhythm as an auxiliary or as a byproduct or as something that just happens by accident but has really no significance at all. Following Deleuze and Guattari, and hinted at by Lyotard, we can say that it's the rhythm that is at the basis. The rhythm is at the root of the way signs operate. The interesting thing about rhythm is that it does not mean anything. It just is. It creates a certain territory because there is a kind of consistency to the rhythm. What is it? How do you know when there is a rhythm? What is the difference between rhythm and absence of rhythm? You kind of start recognizing patterns, no? That's how you know that there is a rhythm. Yeah. If there are no patterns, then it's much harder to know. So I have to jump a little bit ahead to Deleuze and Guattari to show you what is actually folded in this little word recurrence that Lyotard is bringing in, and how Deleuze and Guattari will latch onto it later on and use it to develop the whole question of territorialization and the refrain. But that's in On the Refrain in Thousand Plateaus. Let's have a look a bit later on. In the same page 44, he carries on and says, "It is the well-prepared flight of the explorer, foreshadowing that of the priest, then the soldier, and the businessman, it is the avant-garde of capital, which is itself already simply capital insofar as it is the perpetual activity of pushing back its frontiers, the incorporation of yet more new pieces of the band into the system, but incorporation with a view to revenue, to yielding a return. So that's all this accusation he puts at the door of signification. Imperialism, racism, chauvinism. He says it's all coming, somehow it's all connected with your insistence that things should have meaning. You arrive at distant shores, you find another civilization, another culture, and what is your response? You try to understand. So you look at the example he has there somewhere. You look at the Japanese theater, and you see the actor moving across the stage in a certain way, and you say, yeah, but what does it mean? Or you go to your psychiatrist, and you say, I have real problems with my boss hates me. What does it mean? It must mean something to do with your father. It must mean something to do with Oedipus. It must mean something to do with castration. It must have meaning. That's the condition, that's the Lyotard's diagnosis of what is wrong with Western civilization. Our malaise is this need to attribute meaning to everything. Our imperialism is the imperialism of the sign. We want to go everywhere, and we want to attach, we want basically to see everything as a representation. We want to ask, but what does it represent? And we know that behind the sign, all we will find is always just another sign. It's an infinite task. Why he brings in capitalism? Because it's almost, I think what he's trying to say there is that this drive to see sign behind sign, is the drive to attach meaning to everything, or to extract meaning to everything, is very similar to the drive of capitalism to extract value from everything, or to convert everything into a commodity. Yeah. Now, without going too far in that direction, then what semiotics and capitalism have in common is that in the same way that capitalism seeks to convert everything into value and extract value from things by converting them into commodities, that's the job of the marketing department in every institution, which I'm sure we have here as everywhere else. Well, what a marketing person does, they take things like a book that someone written, a song, an artwork, or whatever, and they make it into a commodity. They make it into something that has monetary value, that can be sold or bought for a certain price. This is a very strange, mystical operation. How do you take something like, you know, a glass of water and convert it into money?
Must be an hypothesis.
There is definitely a hypothesis, but without even dwelling on that too much, and go and look at the first book of Capital, Marx. What Lyotard is saying is that semiotics is a kind of the same method, but instead of seeking monetary value, it seeks meaning. So then, from pages 50 and 51, he speaks at length about dance, as and that's one of his examples. Now, the whole tensor chapter, dealing with several examples, most of them taken from Freud, and I don't think that important. I think we could replace them with our own examples. And in a sense, the only way to understand a kind of text like that, or to make sense of a text like this, if you're going to write about it for your essay, is to replace the examples Lyotard offers with your own. And in that way, just as I was trying to do, perhaps not very successfully, with MasterChef, in that way these things acquire a certain agency for us. So I just want you to look at on page 53, just where it is just before the end of the section. It says there, order matters little. What is, however, of great importance is the fact that this same symptom has inevitably two simultaneously possible receptions. I just want you to draw your attention to that. A symptom, or let's say even a sign, can have two possible receptions. So a sign, at the very least, we shouldn't try to see signs in a simplistic way as just having meaning. Something else is possible. And if you look at this section after the class, you will see that these two interpretations that Lyotard is talking about are taken from Freud, they're taken from psychoanalysis. One of them is neurotic and the other is schizophrenic. Yeah? And for Lyotard, it's very interesting. Neurosis is the condition of Western civilization. It is the malaise. Why? What is it going to be neurotic? Neurotic, I think, maybe I'm wrong here, and clearly it's not medical advice, but neurotic is someone who obsessively interprets everything. So when I'm neurotic, I think that someone is following me. I see signs, So I might receive something in the post and think, oh, that's because they're after me. And the only difference between a neurotic and a healthy person is that their interpretations are maybe different, or their representations are not the normative ones. Yeah. So that's what being neurotic means, and that's why you go to a psychiatrist. A psychiatrist will explain to you that you interpret these things in the wrong way, and they are correct interpretations. That's where Oedipus comes in. That's where castration comes in. That's where fetish comes in. That's the tools the psychiatrist has to cure your neurosis by giving you the correct interpretations instead of the wrong ones you have because you are sick. The alternative, because he says two simultaneously possible receptions, the alternative is schizophrenia. What does it mean to have schizophrenia? Again, it's not a. I'm not talking from any medical knowledge, but just from a philosophical understanding. Schizophrenia is multiple personalities. I'm one person one day, and the next day I'm someone else. One day I'm cowboy, the next day I'm, the Pope or Chef. Yeah, exactly. It means a kind of multiplicity. And multiplicity is a key, because it means that there is no single ego or single I for whom all these interpretations unfold, or there is no single human ear that hears harmonies or disharmonies. They are just different entities, different instances. I'm not happy with what I am now. It stresses me out to be here with you. I can be someone else. I can suddenly become, the Queen of England if I want, or as Johnny says, the Maserati sports car. Did she tell you that? No. She would. So, that's schizophrenia. Now, Lyotard says that's good. That's healthy. That means not being attached to a single system of values, not being attached to a single model, to a single dictionary, to a single interpretation. So, yeah, of course, it is also scary. I mean, it is quite scary to be schizophrenic because you might end up locked up in a mental asylum. You might be ostracized. But at the same time, there is something infinitely creative about this ability to be just not to be a one thing, not to be this one thing. So then, you could say that the schizophrenic has a particular technology of becoming something else. You know how Deleuze and Guattari introduced this concept of becoming animal, becoming a woman, becoming various things, becoming other, becoming minor. Are you familiar with that? This idea of becoming really comes from attention to how schizophrenia operates. And once Lyotard gets onto this horse, he spends many pages talking about this fleshing, and we're going to skip all of that because he really shows how schizophrenia was kind of managed and ignored and disciplined by Freud. I think that is this is basically an example. It will be more interesting to move to page 65, where we leave Freud for a second and we talk about simulacrum and phantasm. I pick pages 64, 65. How are we doing for time? Are we still okay? What? So what time do you normally finish? 10 minutes. Really? Also, we almost okay. Well, look, so we have 15 minutes. Yeah. Good. Yeah. Jane asked me to pick something up, so and I have it playing at 10 stage. I know you really need to know that. Anyway, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the simulacrum. On page 65, he says in the very beginning, fourth line from the top, what is at stake under the name of simulacrum is the very position of the sign which we have just criticized, its theological stock. Now, simulacrum will be coming up again and again. So I just want to explain to you what, or maybe to try to clarify, why is simulacrum, what is the connection between simulacrum and the surface and the tensor? And I realized that we really didn't speak a lot about the surface, but maybe in the last 5 minutes I will try to tie it all together in a nice bundle. But basically, in Plato, simulacrum, or simulacra is plural, simulacrum is singular, makes its appearance. So, 2 words about Plato, just to draw a couple of lines. For Plato, images come in 2 flavors. There are 2 kinds of images. There are images that are true representations of things. Yeah? These are the good images. And then there are images that just appear as if they represent something, but really they are just illusions. Fata Morgana, make-believe. Yeah? So, for instance, you know how sometimes you drive on a road in the summer and you kind of see like little pools of water or lakes? That is a fake image for Plato. That's a simulacrum. It's particularly bad when people make these images in order to deceive you. So some images are just made by deceptors, liars, dishonest people, people who want to mess with your head. And other images are made by people with good intentions who want to explain to you something, and then they use an image to illustrate it. Yeah? So some images refer to reality and present reality without hiding that they are images. So for instance, a good example is, you know Plato's The Story of the Cave? Yeah? Now it is an image. It is an image Plato uses to explain how learning happens, how one could arrive at some notion of truth. Yeah. Now it is an image, but it's a honest image, Plato will say. Why? Because he is telling you it's a story, it's a fable. It's framed as a story. It's an image that tells you, look, I have an image, I'm going to show you something in order so you understand it better. That's a honest, that's a good image. A bad image is one that pretends not to be an image, pretends to be the real thing, like a hologram or something that you kind of almost think you can reach out and grab. Now, that's the simulacrum. What people like Klossowski, Lyotard, Deleuze, but also people like Lacoulaba in his book Typography, what all of them are trying to do is basically to point that this distinction that Plato draws, and this distinction is so central to the way we understand the world, this distinction between true images and false images. So you want an example of a true image? Science is a kind of true image. Yeah? Science always tells us that it gives us true images of the solar system, of the atom, of the DNA. Yeah? And then there are bad images. There are magical, mystical, imaginary images. So when Lyotard and others get hold of the simulacra, what they want to do is not to say, the argument here is not to say, look, simulacra also has some kind of truth, but is to say, what simulacra teaches us is that all images are kind of deceptive. The whole distinction between true images and false images is itself false. Yeah? Now the way to get to it is a little bit complicated, and you need to kind of go back and look at Plato, especially in his in the Republic, and its dialogue, and the dialogue Meno, very useful. Then you realize that Plato says, look, I can teach you how to distinguish between a true image and a false image. I can teach you how to distinguish between good and bad. And we can arrive at that. What will be the mechanism? What will be the device? How will we find the criterion? The criterion, Plato says, is a dialogue, is a discussion. Through discussions, through dialogue, we can arrive through a rational evaluation. You know how all these Platonic dialogues go, is that Socrates asks various questions, and slowly, through this kind of logical procedure, leads the replier to contradict themselves. And then suddenly you realize that if you thought at first something about what is power, what is good, if you had some ideas, Socrates, by asking you various questions, leads you to realize that your own original idea was contradictory. So Plato suggests a kind of rational procedure based on dialogue in order to arrive at truth. But what Lyotard is saying in his discussion about simulacra is, yeah, but what is the basis of this idea that a logical procedure can get you to truth? There is again some kind of contraband. There is something is taken as an axiom, something is taken for granted. You remember how we started this discussion about the tensor by going to on the first page, when we said the hypothesis beneath their discourse. So the hypothesis beneath this Platonic discourse, which is at the basis of all our Western culture, is that rationality logic, dialogue, reason, all these things can lead you to truth. To put it very, very simply, you know, brutally simply, thinking can lead you to truth. Thinking equals truth. Yeah? That's what is taken as a given, as a contraband by the Western semioticians, imperialists, castrators, all these people that Lyotard hates. And he says, look, this is just as problematic. It's not solving anything. At least you need to realize that this assumption that thinking leads to truth is a contraband. It's not based. Where is the thought to prove that thought can lead to truth? I mean, clearly, you will not be able to prove it by thinking, because you need first to establish that thinking equals truth in some way. Yeah? It's like saying science advances through experimentation. Fine. But where is the experiment to prove the truth of the experiment? Yeah, this is
God.
Sorry?
Believe in God.
Well, we spoke earlier about the two forms of knowledge.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, but what if, and that's what Lyotard says, instead of believing in God, you will say, believe in art. So here you see, that's kind of the nub. The nub is that what is being forgotten in Western culture is that the very basis has a kind of very mythological, irrational origin to it. To say that thought will lead you to truth is irrational. That is the basis of all rationality. Yeah? So, the basis of all rationality is irrational. But that is a big secret. That has to be hidden, covered, buried, burnt, forgotten. In a later book titled Heidegger and the Jews written with a small j and in inverted commas, because it doesn't mean the Jewish nation or religion, but the Jews as a concept. In Heidegger, he precisely says, he kind of says, almost like he says, the reason the Jews had to be left out of the Heideggerian discourse, why Heidegger never spoke anything about the Holocaust, for instance, even, you know, in his later years, you know, after the whole denazification, you know, when he kind of repent and everything. Why he never spoke anything about the Holocaust or the Jews, you know? And Lyotard's answer is that that is what had to be left out of the discourse. That's what had to be forgotten, buried, completely covered, camouflaged, in order for the discourse to get started. Almost in this later book, the Jews stand in for this mythological, mystical origin of that creates the connection between thought and truth. So just remember that very thing. This is really, really important. The whole story of Western civilization, the whole great achievement and the wonderful edifice of Western culture is possible because we start from this point, from this position, that thought will lead you to truth. If you think through, if you think rationally, if you categorize, catalog, divide, you will achieve great things. If you look at the world as it is, as one big oneness, you can just look at it in awe and say, oh my God, it's awesome. But you won't be able to do anything with it. But if you divide it, catalog it, index it into different trees, different shapes of clouds, different specimens, different species, different genera, then you can start getting control. Yeah? So that's how control, domination, that's how you dominate environment, whether it's the world or another country or another civilization, you catalog, divide, represent, understand. It's very, very powerful. It got us where we are now. What Lyotard is saying is that at the very basis of this wonderful procedure is this little idea that thought will lead to truth, that thought is truth. Notice the difference here. For Parmenides, you remember what it was? Thought? Thought is being. Yeah. So, for us, thought is truth. Yeah? This is not the same thing. That's exactly the nub of the whole issue. So, however, this origin of our own logic, of our own reason, we had to hide. You know, we could not admit that it is kind of random, accidental, that it is sort of, it could be otherwise. It's a secret that had to be forgotten. And what Lyotard is saying is that within the sign, there is something that can remind you that there is something else there besides meaning. Meaning, logos, reason, truth, all these things. There is something else there. There is just this thing, this ability to go to another sign. This ability to create sign is not only meaning, it is also tension. Yeah? The tension of the MasterChef participant before the judgment is being pronounced. That's the kind of tension that is present in the sign. Yeah? That is the tensor. The tensor is not outside the sign, it is in the sign, but it is not the meaning. Yeah? Now, let's see, we have maybe 2 minutes. I just want to briefly say what we kind of got so far, what we got on the table. And then I'm also happy to answer a couple of questions. Essentially, Lyotard suggests nothing less than re-evaluation of all values. That's, by the way, a title of a book by Nietzsche. And Nietzsche is really important for Lyotard. Nietzsche is important for all these people. Re-evaluation of all values. He says, look, our civilization has a dirty little secret. And this dirty little secret is that our starting point is quite arbitrary. Because we took it as given that thought is truth. However, it is just a rhetoric. It's just a gesture. And maybe that's why behind each one of our signs, all we find is another sign. We never get to any real being. So he says, what is being left out of all these signs is that apart from meaning, there is something else. There is the tensor, the tension, the kind of, I think about the string of the bow, you know, that you can stretch and release the arrow, but then there is also sound. You know, there is also something else. There is a kind of movement to the string, which is not just about propelling the arrow forward. There is also something else. And where we find this tensor operating most clearly in schizophrenia, because there is this multiplicity of personas, because you can just move from one person to the next. I can just be in turn each one of the people around the table here. That's schizophrenia. In art, because art has the freedom of not following rational logic. In atonal music, because harmonies and scales they are all rational, aren't they? Don't we know that scales are basically mathematical, Pythagorean, all of these things. You divide a string in half and you get you go one octave higher. But if you just have sounds that don't necessarily belong to any scale, then you are in the domain of the tensor. Each sound is just an excuse, or just an opportunity, just a jumping off point to another sound. And that's it. It's not part of any scale. We leave mathematics behind, we leave scales, signifiers behind, and we are in this domain of repetition. We basically enter the uncharted, murky waters of difference. Yeah, where we started from identities, from signification, and we enter now this very strange, very untamed environment of difference. Yeah, difference is something that we probably need to talk about some other time. But Deleuze has this wonderful book, a difficult book, Difference and Repetition. So the other things I wanted to talk about and I didn't have time is the eternal return, Nietzsche's eternal return, Deleuze's difference, an image of thought. So there is more to discuss. Okay, I think questions now. Questions, thoughts, complaints, comments. Sorry? Happy. Oh my God. I'm very sorry. It was not intentional. I really didn't come here trying to make anyone happy, including myself. Anyone else?
I have a question about science and quantum mechanics.
Yeah.
The Lyotard says that science is not, it's not like, it's representation or something like that.
Okay.
And what about all the, for example, the theorem of unstability and Gödel, and all these things. So, maybe science noticed it as well. The same thing that Lyotard noticed, but still it has a method which is different.
You are absolutely right, and I think very often the Lyotard uses language quite loosely, and I agree with you when he talks about science in this negative way. He talks about the kind of, let's say, broadly speaking, the Newtonian science that does not allow two objects to occupy the same space. Lyotard says two objects can occupy the same space. All you need is a kind of time-space wrap, So of course, Einstein for Lyotard is a different form of science, and you are absolutely right. The whole idea of undecidability and Gödel's theorem, which basically argues that even in something as straightforward as arithmetics, there is some space for indeterminacy. You cannot prove a system from within a system.
Which is the same thing that Lyotard is saying.
In the differand. You're absolutely right. Exactly right. Yeah, that's precisely, you're spot on. He has a whole book about it. It's called The Differand. Okay. It's where he basically takes Russell's paradox. Russell's paradox is the precursor to the Gödel theorem. The paradox basically says that you cannot have a series that contains all series. You cannot have a series that contains itself. The way this paradox is normally described in a kind of colloquial way, they say, imagine there is an island with let's say, a battalion of soldiers stationed there, and there is a barber. And the barber shaves everyone who does not shave themselves. The question being, does the barber shave themselves? And then you realize that it's a paradoxical situation, because if the answer is yes, then no, and if no, then yes, and you cannot get out of it. Now, for Russell, that was a kind of a real wake-up call to his attempt to establish a kind of logical, mathematical logic. Gödel's theorem takes that as the starting point and makes much more complex move with it. But Lyotard gets hold of precisely this paradox, and he says it applies not only to logic, it also applies to the way the law operates in a legal situation. There are sometimes situations when there is the accused and the accuser, they go to court, and the problem is settled. So, for instance, if you hit me in the face or steal my bag, you can go to court, and the court will decide if I am the plaintiff, what is the compensation I should receive. Yeah. However, there are also some situations when, let's say, the law might say, however, if the person speaks with a funny accent, then the law doesn't apply. In that case, I cannot go to court because I cannot be the plaintiff. I cannot even, it's almost like a Palestinian cannot go to an Israeli court and say, I want my land back, because that's the one thing that the court does not have space for. In the same way that an Algerian cannot come to the French government and say, what about, the things you've done to me during your occupation, because the court is not set up like this. So sometimes you cannot. So there are legal situations in which you cannot get justice because the law is skewed in a certain direction, in someone's favor. For that reason, a woman can never have justice in a male-dominated society. For that reason, a black person can never have justice in a society which is essentially racist. That's the difference. And it's really very much connected to Gödel and to this kind of mathematics and to this kind of science. And the question of antecedability definitely informs
Maybe it talks more about applied sciences than like theoretical science. I mean, Lyotard complains and laments more of pure technology than of let's say thinkers like Gödel or Einstein, which are more thinkers and kind of philosophers as well.
Yeah.
I mean,
I'm very sorry. I realize that I have to finish now because I have to catch a train. And Johnny asked me to go to her flat and pick something from there. Anyone knows where she lives? If I tell you the address, will you tell me what it is? Where is Bennett's Hill? Can someone show me? Is someone going that way?
So it's